Sedona. It is Saturday, May 4th, 2024, and this is Sedona Life with Stephen Hanks, Red Rock Country's radio magazine, heard every Saturday at this time on KAZM 106.5 FM and 780 AM Mellow Mountain Radio. And we're also live streamed at mellowmountainradio.com. I'm your host, Stephen Hanks, and I welcome you to a radio show that each and every week explores all the fascinating aspects of life in Sedona and the Verde Valley and engages with intriguing personalities from all walks of life in our area. And I have two of them in my studio right now. Today's show and all of my shows until the rest of this month are being sponsored by an outstanding local real estate company. Damien and Danielle's Sedona Village Real Estate Group with Caldwell Banker Realty should be your go-to real estate agents in the Sedona area. Why, you may ask? Because their experience in Sedona and the Verde Valley and their dedication to this community matter. My producer, as always, behind the glass is the reliable Ryan Thompson. Ryan,
I like
how
the
you
reliable
doing?
Ryan.
I have to do my alliteration. You know, I can't go a day without some of the alliteration. So how you doing today?
Good, man. Good.
Yeah.
How yourself? Didn't you have a baseball game last night?
Yeah, I had a baseball game in Scottsdale in my I'm not going to say what age group league, but yeah, I got home at like 1:30.
Ouch.
So if you see me nodding off like Donald Trump in the trial in New York, then you'll know the reason why that happened. By the way, we lost, but I did get like a line drive single to center field. My first time up.
All right.
Guy tried to throw me a 3-2 curveball, and I was all over it.
Nice.
So but we lost the game. So
oh.
Doesn't matter if you get your own hit. You know, it's about the team, right?
Right.
Like this radio station.
Absolutely.
There you go. So Ryan, last week our theme for the show was local singer-songwriters in Sedona, and this week the focus is another foray into creativity. And we'll be chatting with two local authors. By the way, Ryan, it's really difficult to keep my guest list to just two people for this particular theme because I learned shortly after I moved to Sedona 3 years ago, everybody who lives here wants to write a book of some kind, or they think they have. So my special guests in the studio today have actually written books. It's not just that they want to, they've actually written them. But before I introduce my guest, it's time for our usual top of the show segment, Stephen's Sedona Scene, when I recommend some terrific events happening from today into next week in Sedona and the Verde Valley. So for today's show, I'm only going to preview two events, and both of them happen to be happening in Sedona today. So I hope you're listening so you can find out what you have to do later on after the show's over. One of them begins in an hour, so start getting dressed while you're listening so you can head out the door in time for the start of the Cinco de Mayo celebration at Tlaquepaque Arts and Shopping Village. Do you know, Kirstyn, you know how long it took me to pronounce Tlaquepaque the right way after I moved here? It really took a long time.
I had to work on it too.
From 11 a.m. to 5 p.m., you can immerse yourself in the colorful fiesta saluting the rich heritage of Mexico. Enjoy festivities while cheering and whistling to the music of mariachi musicians, clapping to the steps of folklorico dancers, and savoring traditional Mexican food. Admission is free, and there is a free trolley service from the Sedona Municipal Parking Lot at 260 Schnebly Road from 10:30 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. It's another word I love to say, Schnebly. I go into like a Jerry Lewis impression every time I have to say that. And now I just dated myself. So Ryan, you know, as you mentioned, I played baseball last night. I had this game in Scottsdale, and I got back home at about 1:30. So I'm definitely going to be napping this afternoon. So I can be ready to dance my head off with all my friends at the Democrats of the Red Rocks tonight. From 7 to 10 p.m., at the Sedona Elks Lodge on 110 Airport Road in West Sedona, the members of DOOR, which is what they call the Democrats of the Red Rocks, are staging their second Dancing with the Dems soiree. This will be a night of fun, laughter, and fabulous desserts, and probably intense conversations about the next election, all while benefiting the Democrats of the Red Rocks and their 2024 campaign efforts. This year, well-known Sedona area performer and singer Jeannie Carroll will serve as guest DJ and will be spinning all the tunes appropriate for the age demographic. So I don't know how much hip hop and rap is going to be played tonight. There will also be a silent auction to bid on exclusive items and experiences. For tickets to Dancing with the Dems, which is basically a $50 donation, go to democratsoftheredrocks.org/events. So now I'm going to tell you a little bit about my two guests in the studio today. Before we get into that, I'm sure after that will be a stimulating conversation about the intense and challenging process of writing books. Kirstyn Lazur says that writing first entered her life when she was in the second grade. She was telling stories with her number 2 pencil, sketching drawings for books with crayons, and binding them with string and some wallpaper. This is what she sent to me when I asked her to give me a bio. So, not surprisingly, she eventually earned a master's degree in English literature at the University of Connecticut. But Kirstyn experienced some wild twists and turns along the way, both before and after her academic career, and before she landed in Sedona, and she chronicled these experiences in her 2019 autobiography, which she's way too young to have done, by the way. I Was Cursed in Connecticut. If that title doesn't suck you in, nothing will. My other guest in the studio today is Tim Parise, who grew up in Colorado and Montana and studied history at the University of North Dakota and the University of Hawaii before finding his way to Sedona. Doesn't it happen to us all? He is the author of 8 novels and 2 nonfiction books and a few novellas. In genres, and get this list of genres this guy writes in: science fiction, alternate history, contemporary fantasy, and biography, with a little fanciful politics thrown in. He is currently at work on a new book exploring the relationships between human biochemistry and the evolution of cultural traits. After coming to Sedona, Tim joined the staff of the Sedona Red Rock News as a general assignment reporter in 2022, where he covers everything from local city politics to reviewing classical music concerts. And, Tim, we're going to talk to you a little bit later, but one thing I wanted to point out, before I knew that you wrote all these books, I noticed reading the Red Rock News that you covered a very eclectic mix of topics. And then once I saw the books you wrote, I figured, okay, it's a natural. This guy can handle a lot of subjects and do it well. So kudos to you for that.
Oh, well, thank you. It's just my mind covers a lot of topics, so it's fun to write about them all. Why pick one?
Yeah, exactly. So I welcome both of you to Sedona Life with Steve and Hanks.
Thank you.
So Kirstyn, I'm going to start with you on your novel. So, obviously, the book is about being cursed in Connecticut, and but when did you arrive in Sedona, and where were you before you got here? Where did you come from?
I was living in LA before I arrived in Sedona. I was in Santa Monica, and when I first got to Santa Monica, I thought, "Oh, I'm right near the ocean.
Right,
it's going to take a lot for me to leave." But by the end of 2018, the universe was just telling me, "Get out." I was just getting pushed out every which way. Didn't really know where to go, where I would move to. And I had a friend here. I was at UCLA briefly in a graduate program, and we had met through that program. And she said, "Why don't you move to Sedona?" I said, "I don't know. I can't. There's no ocean around. What am I going to do? I can't survive without the water." She's like, "Oh, we have a creek." So I came, checked it out. I'm like, yeah, maybe I can make this work. And then I moved to Sedona and finished writing my book in Sedona.
Yeah. So when the book takes place, I Was Cursed in Connecticut. I believe you said in the front of the book, oh, you were 26 at the time all of this happened, at the beginning of it. How long were you thinking about putting all these experiences into a book? And what was the impetus to finally start writing?
Yeah, great question. So yeah, I was about 26 when my book starts. It starts with my mom's death and the events that transpire shortly after. And I think kind of when I was in the thick, I would say it's a dark night of the soul kind of book. And when I was really, really challenged, I was journaling. I was journaling my experience and, just weeping tears into the pages. And that's when I knew that eventually it was going to be a book, because I was searching and searching for some kind of experience to validate or give some kind of clue as to what I was experiencing and going through. And I just couldn't find a book out there that was about what I was experiencing. So I thought, well, I guess I have to be the one to write it.
So I want to read a little snippet that's on the back cover of the book that will tell our listeners what it's about. But before I do that, how many years span from the time it starts when you were 26 to where the book ends? Like, how many years were you going through this whole experience?
I would say it was about 8 years.
Wow. Okay. And how many years when the book ends, how long did it take you to get here? Like, what was the year span there?
You mean the writing process?
No, just like when the story of the book ends compared to when you moved to Sedona.
Oh, I see. Probably the story of the book ends about 2012.
Okay.
And I'm in Sedona by 2018.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. I just thought that was interesting because you've been here 8 years now, so it's time to get working on another book.
Yes, for sure.
I always push you since we met each other.
Yes.
Right. So, all right. So I want to read this snippet from the back cover. The book was I Was Cursed in Connecticut by Kirstyn Lazur. So here's how it goes. At 26, Kirstyn Lazur is numb. Her mother is dead. Desperately looking for answers, she is mysteriously drawn to a psychic shop in New London, Connecticut. There she meets a psychic who says that a powerful family curse has befallen her. After following instructions to remove the curse, Kirstyn is eager to leave the past behind and moves to Los Angeles, California to start anew. But when she meets a man and falls in love, the curse returns and threatens to destroy them both. Ravaged by physical pain that cannot be addressed through conventional methods, she is forced to do something she promised she would never do again: see a psychic. It is not until Kirstyn uncovers the truth about the curse that she is finally able to set herself free. And, I actually should say when I met you, because that's how I got a copy of the book, a couple of Christmases ago, I amazingly got cast to play George in a version of The Great Gatsby. It was that Camilla Ross's Emerson Theater Collaborative was putting on. And it was actually, the conceit of the show was that a radio station is doing their radio version of The Great Gatsby. And I met Kirstyn there because the director wanted to include some dance sequences, especially at the beginning of the show. And Kirstyn was one of the dancers, and that's maybe a little bit we'll get into later. But I just wanted to mention our connection because I got together with Kirstyn when I heard about the book. I got a copy, and I was pulled in immediately by the first line of the prologue, which is, "My name is Kirstyn, pronounced Kirstyn." And when I was reading this book, what's interesting to me is that it's autobiographical, but it reads like a novel. It really pulled me in. And I can't say, this is what I want you to address, and we had this conversation before. I can't say that I had a love-hate relationship with the story, but I identified with it kind of as a father of a daughter. And as I was reading it, although I thought it was extremely well written and a great story, if you were going to see it on the screen, I also kind of, as a father, wanted to grab you and wring your neck. I was so frustrated. I was sympathetic but frustrated about what you were going through because I could feel the pain that you were dealing with. but to me as a reader, you were dealing with the pain, and I was always saying, what are you doing? Like, I wanted to jump into the pages and pull you out of that. And I'm sure other people have had that. I don't know, maybe they have, and you'd have to tell me what people's reaction has been to the book, but just what's your response to like the way I read that?
Okay, well, yeah, I've definitely heard that before. And when I was working on early drafts, one of some of the feedback that I got was, this is just so unbelievable, right? Like, I don't want to continue reading this because it's just unbelievable.
Yeah.
And why do you keep doing this to yourself? And so one of my tasks as a writer, looking at this from, okay, I have this story. I want people to get to the end of the book.
Mm-hmm.
What do I do? And so I knew I had to change the structure. I knew I had to craft the book in such a way that you wouldn't want to give up on the main character.
Mm-hmm.
You would want to see her reclaim her power. And you'd want to keep turning the pages. Even if you didn't believe the supernatural events that were going on, you'd still want to see how the story ended.
Well, and even if you didn't want her to reclaim her power, you wanted to continue it just to see what would happen.
See what would happen, right? So that's really where I started studying the craft of writing. I realized, I don't know a thing about writing. And so it took a lot of digging. It took me reading a book about really how to craft it. And it's funny that you mentioned, it reads like fiction, but it's nonfiction. And the book that I used to really craft, my final draft was a fiction, right? Was she was using the example of a fiction, but yeah, my story is pretty fantastical and out there. So I wanted it to read like fiction, even though they're real life events. So sometimes truth is stranger than fiction. And I think I have that Mark Twain quote in there for that very reason. Yes.
But one of the things that we talked about months ago after I read the book was, what occurred to me is that, boy, this could really be turned into a really cool screenplay. And that's when you said that you had an idea about possibly, and I don't want to put you on the spot about this, so a possible one-woman show about playing yourself in this character.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
What's your thought about that, and how's it going?
So, when I first published the book, it was so raw, so vulnerable. I feel that my first language is dance, which is how we met, right? You mentioned.
Right.
And my second language is writing. And I never considered myself a very good speaker. I've always felt very shy around speaking my truth and just speaking up. And I think that's why I work with international students, because I understand their struggle of trying to formulate words. Because I feel like I struggle with that a lot in terms of speaking. And so, as I've done more healing around the book, as my stories come out, right? When you talk about things, the shame level dissipates, right? There was still that element of shame when I first published. And so now I'm at a point of healing and really realizing that so much of us, like my story is the story of getting really mixed up in a lot of lies and illusions. And, this world that we live in is full of these illusions, right? That we're all navigating and making our way out of. So in a way, it's a very specific story, but like all good stories, it's a universal truth. So I'm thinking, well, I've done this healing around this story. I feel like I want to rebirth it in a way. And that way, because I love the stage so much, I feel that it should be on stage. And the theater has always been my catharsis and can be a catharsis for others. The whole point of me sharing my story is to help other people in their struggles, right? Whatever they might be going through, there are points of connection to my story. So yes, I have a script for a one-woman show on this story, and I'm just getting back to it now and revisiting characters and bringing the story to life in that way.
This may be kind of far afield in thinking of a one-woman show about the book, but considering your dance background, Do you see any possibility of employing movement if you did a one-woman show?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. People have asked if I'm going to sing. I'm like, no, I'm not going to go that far.
Right.
I'm not a singer, but
Right.
yes. Yeah, I just said my dance is my first language, so it's probably going to open the show, probably going to close the show. There'll be a couple of little things throughout the show that touch on movement. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be really interesting to see
Mhm.
how you interpret the story in dance, or some parts of the story.
Mhm.
I don't know if this was one of your motivations when you were writing it, but one of the things that I think that you do that is actually a service to people who read it is exploring the whole subculture of fortune telling and mediums and that whole, I don't know, for lack of a better word, genre of people. I mean, was one of your intentions to kind of expose that world?
Totally.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. And the irony is, here I found myself in Sedona,
Right.
where there's a whole lot of readers reading, and people looking for psychics everywhere on every block, right? Yeah. So yes, part of the reason I wrote this book is to expose what goes on in that world. And there are people that come from a good place, but I think we have to be very, very conscious and careful of what we're telling people in a sort of reading.
Mm.
And you don't have to be a psychic to give someone a reading, right? You could say, well, I see your life unfolding in this and this and this way. Well, that's kind of setting up a paradigm and limiting what can actually happen. We live in a quantum universe where the possibilities are endless, and really, we are the author of our own lives. We are the creator of our own lives. And so, it doesn't matter what someone else puts there, but a lot of times if the person has bad intent, they're going to set up some kind of power dynamic where, there's a kind of structure or story that they're telling you that's not in your best interest.
Right.
And so that's what I wanted to expose.
Well, and I have to say, since now we know that was one of your goals with the book, I think you did it in a very kind of elegant, non-accusatory way. I mean, you didn't make it like a political statement or, get on a soapbox about these people must be stopped. There was none of that stuff.
Yeah, no.
You did a very good job on that.
I think I tried really hard. And, as a writer, writing different characters, I think it's important that we have compassion for every single character, even the quote unquote evil ones. They do have something redeeming about them. Otherwise, I wouldn't have engaged with that person. Yeah. So yeah, I try to craft the story from a place of love. And that includes having compassion for everyone in the story.
Right. From the time that the story stops in this book till, I don't know, maybe not necessarily where you are now, but a couple of years ago, do you see any possibility of like another book picking up where this left off, or would you do something completely different?
I've had people say, why don't you write a book called Blessed in Sedona? As the follow-up to Kirstyn, Connecticut. I haven't considered that book yet, although I do feel there's something brewing. I feel like there's a little bit more time that has to pass. Yeah. Especially when you're writing about your life. You can't rush it. Yeah. It's done when it's done. It's ready when it's ready. There's a certain amount of healing that has to transpire. There's a certain amount of reflection that's required before the story goes out there. So,
and things could change while you're actually writing the book.
Things can change. Yeah. Yes. I was just talking to someone the other day who's like, I don't know. I have this story, but I don't know where it ends yet. I'm like, okay, well, it's not ready to be written then, So yes, I think there will be another book. For now, I'm contemplating writing about other stories. While I work on my own show. Who knows?
Well, at the risk of being like a pushy parent, I really encourage you. I hope you do the one woman show. I'd really love to see that. So, take your time. Nobody's going anywhere. We'll all be here. So
Thank you.
that's
Thank you
great.
for that encouragement. I
Yeah,
really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
So at this point, before we talk to Tim Parise, it's time to give a shout out to my terrific sponsor of this show, who will be the sponsors until the end of May. And it's Damien and Danielle's Sedona Real Estate Group. Nestled in the heart of our breathtaking Sedona, husband and wife Damien Bruno and Danielle Gian have not just lived, but flourished for more than 20 years in the Verde Valley. As pillars of the village of Oak Creek, they've raised a family, volunteered tirelessly with the Rotary Club of Sedona Village and the Sedona Village Partnership, and for a decade have been the proud organizers of the beloved annual community barbecue in the village of Oak Creek. Damien and Danielle aren't just your next real estate agents. They're your neighbors, your friends, and a top Sedona team ready to support you, whether you're buying or selling. With 2 decades of real estate expertise and a love of our community that's second to none, Damien and Danielle's Sedona Real Estate Group, Village Real Estate Group, is the go-to business for your real estate needs. They want to make your Sedona dream a reality. So contact them today at SedonaRealestateAgents.com, because community and experience matter. And at this point, I want to bring our other guest into the conversation, Tim Parise. And what's fascinating to me about Tim is that I knew of him originally as a general assignment reporter and also reviewer of entertainment shows for Sedona Red Rock News. And when I was trying to figure out what other person to have on the show today, which is not an easy job when, like I said, everybody in Sedona has written a book or wants to. It's hard to figure out what 2 people you want to bring in as guests. I learned that Tim had written all these books, all these novels and nonfiction, and really, really kind of interesting, for lack of a better word, an eclectic mix of topics. I'll just give you a little taste of a few of the books, the description of a few of the books Tim has written, so you can get an idea of what this gentleman has come up with. So this one book is called Hyperdrive Europe 2300 AD. A Marquesian scholar spontaneously begins developing the ability to act as the long-sought hyperdrive, a device, or in this case, a person capable of reprogramming the time-space continuum and transporting people and objects across the galaxy at will. And that jumped out at me because I've recently gotten deeply back into watching Star Trek reruns. So this is right up the alley. So that's one. This one's really cool. My wife, the woman warrior, will love this because she's like a World War II fanatic. She watches every documentary about World War II and Hitler. I mean, I don't ask me why. I think it's because she grew up in Germany for a while. But anyway, so this book is called The Better Berlin, 1939. Check out this description. An American tourist walks into a bar, which is not a beginning of a joke, of the Adlon Hotel and offers, while tipsy, to bet that Germany and Russia will make common cause against Poland in the near future. The locals don't buy such an outlandish prediction and take him up on his offer. Later that evening, the news comes over the radio that Germany and the USSR have just signed a non-aggression pact, which happened in real life. 6 years later, Professor Harry Gordon is still gambling, winning $250,000 on a long shot at Belmont Park in New York and making steady profits on the stock market as well. That I didn't know that it was going to go there, by the way. So these are the 2 that really caught my eye, and these are, one of them is a novel and one is a novella, right? I think
Both of those are novels, actually.
Well, those are novels,
Yes.
but ones I'm going to talk about. The Senator Dies at Dawn is a novel,
That's a full-length novel.
right? And the second, so The senator dies at dawn. Check this out. When a United States senator is shot during his morning run, Washington's Metropolitan Police Department at first focuses its investigation on an old political rival from his home state. Why am I feeling that I'm listening to this during the campaign? Anyway, MPD Detective Lewis, who has been placed in charge of the case, reluctantly accepts the assistant of Special Agent Colfax of the FBI as he resents federal intrusion into what appears to be a simple murder. And it goes on from there, and that sounds fascinating. And then the last one I wanted to talk about, because as you all know, I'm very politically inclined. It's called the Parallel Congress. On Election Day 2020, voter turnout in the United States is at an all-time low, along with public confidence in the government as a whole. Philanthropist Alexander Soren decides to capitalize on this growing swell of popular dissatisfaction by launching a radical new project, a parallel Congress, composed of ordinary citizens selected at random from the entire population of the country. It is a statistically perfect society. Political parties, perfect representation of all the various backgrounds and opinions that make up American society. Political parties and advocacy groups, seeing it as a threat to their control of the process of lawmaking, hurry to denounce it. Nevertheless, the parallel Congress balances the budget, restructures the tax system, and launches a new national energy policy in a matter of weeks, winning it the love of the general public. More importantly, its success begins to raise the question of what gives government legitimacy: tradition, succession, and heritage, or popularity. And by the way, Tim, I think I could do a whole show just on that concept, which would be fascinating to talk about. Because there are a lot of people out there now who want a parallel government, maybe not in the way you've written about in this book, but in some way, shape, or form, especially on the right. But I don't want to like delve into that realm right now. So the eclectic mix of topics, and where did all this wide range of interest in wanting to write about this come from?
I don't know that wanting to write about it is necessarily even the best way to express it, because with these many interests, the writing just follows naturally. It's something I've done all my life. It's the easiest way for me to express myself. And it helps me think, too. To put the words down on paper helps me work it out in my head.
Right.
So whatever I'm curious about, whatever collection of odd facts or historical documents I may be looking at the time, sometimes they just come together in things that I think would make it intriguing stories.
I mean, in terms of the political stories, I mean, have you always been just generally deeply involved in and interested in politics, or you just wanted to write about what you saw and felt happening in the culture right now?
Deeply involved, no. Interested, yes. I double majored in political science in college, but the nature of my interest has shifted somewhat over the years from treating the political system as a given of our time the way it typically does, the way I did in some of my earlier books, and moving towards a broader view in which it's simply one aspect of the history of human cultural evolution.
Right. What about your interest in science fiction? I mean, that seems to pop up a lot. Where does that come from?
Science fiction was both an early and a late interest. An early interest in the form of Jules Verne, who has always been an inspiration. Mm-hmm. Someone with one innovative idea goes out and uses it to do something dramatic that can have an outsized effect on the course of history. And then more of my interest in science fiction really took off in my late teens, early 20s, when I began to discover all the greats: Isaac Asimov, Frank Herbert.
Right, of course, yeah.
Asimov's writing, of course, not just the simplicity of it, but the enormous variety that he has in exploring so many different possible futures, alternate courses of development for the human species. He's one of probably a comparatively few authors who would write one book laying out one philosophy and then write another book laying out exactly the opposite philosophy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'm always fascinated and interested in talking about the creative process, whether it's books, movies, people that write Broadway musicals, anything like that. So in your process, I mean, how much for these various books, whether they be political or science fiction or one of the novels, how much research is involved in each of these? So, and what's like the gestation period when you start working on one of these books?
That's both enormously variable and yet kind of divisible into two different answers depending on what kind of book it is.
Okay.
For the fiction books, of course, the research process is much less intense.
Right.
For most of the novels, I'd say, the early ones anyway, I'd say I spent about 3 months on outlining, researching, coming up with the way I wanted to structure the chapters and the plot.
Mm.
The actual writing process, provided you actually set aside some time each day to do it, which I did, it was about 6 to 8 weeks per book. The exceptions were kind of the novellas, which I did in 2016, which were just a quick project for the fun of it during election year. And then my last novel, which I didn't even bother to outline. I sat down and started writing it and said, well, I'll go with this. I'll see if I can get a fun little story out of it. And 2.5 months later, I have a 160,000 word book. So
yeah.
So for novels, the research process is shorter and the writing process is often shorter. For nonfiction, it's a much longer process. The monograph I wrote on the life and works of E. Phillips Oppenheim took 3 years to research and write. And that was a comparatively simple project compared to the one I'm doing now, which was I've been working on for 4 years. And I expect it will probably take another 4 to 5 years to complete.
So tell us a little bit about that since you brought it up. What's the new project?
Well, that project is exploring the relationships between culture and human biology over the course of history. And I can go a little deeper, but I don't know how deep you want me to get there.
Yeah, but I can already tell why it would take a long time.
It is. It's basically tracking changes in human development and placing them alongside observable changes we can see in the archaeological and historical record of how our body chemistry changed as our circumstances changed.
Right. How long were you interested in tackling that subject? Did it just come to you, or you've been thinking about it for a while?
You know, I have been thinking about it for a while. There's an essay in the Arms in the American collection that briefly touches upon some of the same material, which is back in 2016, 2017, when I was first beginning to get interested in that. But the way it came about was in large part because I was thinking about a potential future move to the Southwest, Arizona, New Mexico, somewhere. So naturally, I start reading up on the history. That is how I first come to discover the work of Ruth Benedict, the anthropologist, and her book Patterns of Culture, in which she focused on comparative analysis of the Puebloan versus the Plains cultures in North America. Wow. It was out of this book that I discovered the terms Apollonian and Dionysian, used in a cultural context for the first time to describe historical typologies of behavior. And then I realized that, of course, Benedict wasn't the only one. There's a long trend of sociologists, historians, theorists, going back probably to Johann Jacob Bachofen in the mid-19th century, who have been using these terms to describe both opposing sets of human behaviors and a presumed shift from one behavioral typology to the other around the beginning of the transition from deep history to recorded history. So but of course, none of them gave the same typology. None of them could agree on what this was. Right. So that got me curious about looking into what the actual relationships between behavior and culture were. And it's a very fruitful field to work in right now as historians become more and more aware of the importance of deep history, and as a return to interest in biochemistry on the scientific side is coming back into favor again after too many decades spent on DNA research, which has a much more minimal and indirect connection to cultural behaviors.
Yeah.
So the subject fascinated me. The more and more I read about it, the more and more I realized how important it was and how bringing in the biological aspect could improve our understanding of history and why so many societies displaced by thousands of years and thousands of miles from one another nevertheless went down the same path of development to develop coercive urban authoritarian states.
Mm.
And again, also part of my motivation was well expressed. I don't know if you've read 1491 by Charles Mann.
No.
Excellent and important book. But in the introduction to that, he says that what motivated him to write the book was in large part the fact that things that are well known among researchers are not known by and large in the general public, where we have this simplistic and largely wrong narrative of incessant progress from prehistory to the present.
Right. Yeah. You know, when in talking about the political books, the novella and the novel, were you when all this was going on, the motivation of what was going on politically in the country in that period of 2020 and a little bit, basically ever since like the mid 20 teens up until now, you could have gone in two directions if all that was like in your head a lot, which is kind of do what I do, which is like just political essay writing, and giving opinions about how I feel about the situation. In your case, you're writing novels, but kind of trying to, would I be correct in saying that you're making your own political statements, but through fiction, as opposed to just stating your opinion in a blog or an essay?
In the case of the novellas, yes, that was definitely the intent, to provide some political commentary back in 2016 when those were written.
Right. And what about something like The Senator Dies at Dawn? What is that? Just your version of a thriller?
That was The Senator Dies at Dawn was my response to my mom's, who was a great fan of mystery novels, desire that I write a mystery novel. So that was a bit of a challenge for me, because your traditional mystery novel is, there is a murderer. Usually detective novelists have been clear in their rules that it has to be a murder, no lesser crime will do.
Right.
You have to have a murder, and then you have to have a detective, in this day and age, usually a police detective, who goes and solves the murder.
Or like in the 30s when you had the Thin Man.
Right.
Right.
Well, that format doesn't work very well for me, because I'm not a fan of the police going around and taking someone's revenge at second hand.
Right.
Nor am I particularly a fan of the justified vengeance of the killer, told from the first person from the killer's perspective, that line of approach, which pretty much cuts out both of the major ways you can write a mystery novel.
Mm.
So I tried to come up with something else instead, which was to write the story of an investigation, perfectly straight, that seemed to have no obviously discernible motive, other than someone is whacking congressmen.
Yeah.
You have,
really,
yeah, and it was also intended as a rejection of the nonsensical theories that the police and criminologists have about serial killers, and they follow this pattern, they follow that pattern, etc. No, that's an extremely childish way to look at it, which is almost in a way like reading an Anais Nin story from the 1940s.
Yeah, I mean, also in a way, it's like there's kind of a connection in what you just said with your interest in the whole behavioral, cultural dynamic, right? Because you're kind of trying to take a different view of what a serial killer might be.
Oh yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Step outside the paranoia and the superstitions, and actually look at it simply as human beings, without saying, well, this one is on the side of the gods and this one isn't.
That's what. So this is rather a mundane question, but I notice. So is your pen name Parise or Parise?
Parise.
Is that your pen name, or is that your actual name and Tim Perry is your pen name?
No, Perry is the legal name today. Parise is the pen name. That was the original family name. My great-great-grandfather gradually changed it at some point between when he got here and when he became a citizen. But
Right.
when I started writing books, I thought the original version of the name looked better and more distinctive on a book cover.
And I have a method to my madness of why I brought that up, because I want to tell our listeners how they can find your books. They are available through Amazon at amazon.com/author/Parise. Is it Parise or Parise?
Parise.
Parise, Parise. And he also makes ebooks available, get this, for free. And I've already downloaded a few of them
Thank you.
to read at my leisure. And you can do that through Tim's website at this. Can you pronounce this?
Libro della Tutto.
Librodolatuto at .wordpress.com/books. By the way, speaking of names, Kirstyn Lazur, whenever I say your name, I feel like I'm French. Is there any French in your background, or would you like there to be?
There is French in my background, but it's on my mom's side.
Ah.
And my mom's maiden name is Gosher.
Okay.
And my dad's side, Lazur, is Polish, actually.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. What's your background, Tim?
Convoluted, mostly Italian.
Like your books.
Yes. Yeah, mostly Italian, some Slovene, some Scotch-Irish.
Nice. Well, Tim, I also wanted to talk a little bit about, I looked at your CV or bio on the website, and I was told that you're an avid hiker and traveler. You lived on a sailboat in Florida. You've flown airplanes in the Rocky Mountains and competed in snow jumping and 3-day eventing. Over what period of time has that been happening? And are you still doing that kind of stuff?
Over my whole life, and it comes and goes. Horses, I was one of those horse-mad teenagers for a while, so that's the period when I was more involved in writing and competing.
When did you learn how to fly planes?
That started kind of after the horse thing in my late teens. My first semester in college, I went to the University of North Dakota. I was actually in the flight training program there with some idea of becoming a pilot. But their emphasis is all on producing airline pilots. So being in that program, it kind of kills your joy of flight. I got out of it after a semester, and then it took years before I really wanted to get back into airplanes again.
So am I right to assume that doing a balloon ride or taking a pink Jeep tour in Sedona is a little bit too mundane for your taste?
Well, the balloon ride certainly wouldn't be, because I've never been up in a hot air balloon yet.
You got to do that.
Oh, I know.
Yeah. I did that with my wife and daughter as a tourist the first time I came. 6 o'clock in the morning, and you get champagne when you land.
Mm-hmm.
Really
there's
good.
been mornings over the years when I've been camped out west of Sedona, and one morning I almost had a balloon come down right on top of the campground.
Wow.
Yeah, it went into the ravine next to us. So that was probably a hike to get that basket back.
Yeah. When I go to in certain seasons when I'm playing baseball out in Phoenix and Mesa, the games are on Sunday at 9 o'clock, so I have to hit the road here 6:30 at the latest. And when you're driving on 17 going toward Phoenix, that's when all the balloons are out. It's really cool. I'm not going to say that I try to take pictures while I'm driving, because that would be wrong. But don't want to do any bad examples. But in the few minutes that we have left, I want to get back to kind of talking about the creative process with you, Kirstyn. When you were working on this book, just what was your psychological state of mind in approaching it, given it was your first one? How did you get through it? I mean, what were you thinking during the time you were doing? Did you have any readers to give you feedback while you were writing it? Because one of the things, all of these books that you've done and Tim done are all through self-publishing. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So and tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people are doing self-publishing now. But you always wonder if they have an editor, if they have feedback, if they're getting any second opinion or any pair of eyes on it. So how would you answer that?
Yeah. So I did work with Francesca Leah Block. She lived in Culver City, so she was very close to me in from Santa Monica, and I worked with her in a couple of different writing workshops. So one of my first drafts, I reached out to her to have to get feedback. I also, of course, living in LA, you're kind of surrounded by screenwriters and people working in the movie industry, right? So I had a friend at the time who took a look at a draft. So I had, but for my story, because it was so personal, I only wanted people that, yes, could give me an opinion from a writer perspective, but also people who could hold space for me because it was so tender and it was so, if I had, I don't know, I had a soul mission and assignment, so I don't think anyone could get in the way of that. But I also wanted it to be with a safe person, especially in the early stages. And so I will say that, just bringing Sedona back into it, I didn't feel that I was going to publish it in LA. I just didn't feel right about it. And so there was something about moving to Sedona, looking out at the Red Rocks every morning while I was like finishing the last, draft, and just seeing that expansiveness. And it was a reminder to me that this story isn't even mine anymore. I'm the vessel which the story comes through, and it's meant to be shared. I just happen to be the one writing it on the page, but it literally, I felt that it didn't belong to me anymore. I was just the vessel. And the Red Rocks constantly reminded me of that.
That's great.
So I didn't get stuck in my head about, should I really publish this or not? The Red Rocks helped me through that.
That's great. The Red Rocks have that effect, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Tim, what about you? I mean, do you self-edit? Do you have people that you go to for feedback? How does it work for you?
Well, I generally try to consult with some of my friends, preferably the ones who are also writers, on different pieces, depending on their interest, their knowledge of the subject material. I also had a lot of help on my early books from my mom, who was a superb copy editor. And
oh, that's great to have.
She was the type who would, be complaining in professionally published books. Well, I'm finding all these errors. There's fewer errors in your manuscripts. So.
Yeah. No, I hear what you're talking about. I mean, fact checking and copy editing, especially with a lot of websites, is almost non-existent. It was one point when I was doing cabaret show reviews for BroadwayWorld.com for a few years. I was the New York cabaret editor, and I was also doing reviews. There wasn't anybody that was hired to do copy editing because these websites want to produce so much content, they don't really have the time to fact check or copy edit. So, in my case, since I had a long career as a magazine editor, and I started my career as a fact checker, I was always very sensitive about those issues. So whenever I would post a review, and this is the beauty of doing something for the web, when you have access to it, you can go in and make changes constantly. So I would write reviews where, ideas would come to me even after I posted them, and I would change sentences or write new lines or fact check because I knew nobody was going to do it on the back end. And I think that's one of the big issues with self-publishing right now is really inexperienced writers who decide they want to write a book, may not have that other pair of eyes that they go to. They might go back and write multiple drafts because they're, knowledgeable enough to know that they have to do that. But that's what I think one of the big problems is with all the stuff on the internet now. Do you find that, Kirstyn?
Yeah, absolutely. I had a really good copy editor, and she was also a friend of mine, so I felt safe giving her the manuscript. And I was just fortunate. I was fortunate to know people, friends of mine, who are writers, who were willing to look at my my stuff because I know I couldn't catch everything. You know,
Yeah.
when you're in it, you can't see it. So you do need those outside eyes editing your work.
So I had Tim talk a little bit about his extracurricular adventures outside of writing and working for the Red Rock News. So tell us a little bit about you're immersed in dance. You're a dance instructor and a dancer. Tell us a little bit about that part of your life
Yeah.
in like 1 to 2 minutes.
Well, I'm teaching kids in Cottonwood and also right here in Sedona. We got some recitals coming up. So
That's great.
it's a joy. It's a joy to work with kids and be in that energy and teach them what I know. But basically, you know, they're my teachers.
Yeah. And how often do you get a chance to dance yourself, whether in
Ooh.
shows or studio work, whatever?
Not that often, but I do plan on creating a piece for the next dance concert here in Sedona.
And of course, the movement that you want to do for your one-woman show.
And of course, the one-woman show.
When you put those together, I'm just curious, would you have somebody serving as a choreographer, like just almost like as an editor, or would you be comfortable enough to do that yourself?
You mean for my own show?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm comfortable to do it myself because it does fit with the story. So yeah, that'll be my own choreography there.
Yeah.
Mhm.
What is, and talk a brief bit about your teaching the English as a second language stuff, because that's fascinating too.
Yeah, I was working with international students in LA and then continued doing that online when COVID hit. And I was teaching the test of English as a foreign language. So they had to pass this certain test and get to where they wanted to go. So I would meet them in their stressful times and help them out pass that test.
It takes a certain amount of self-confidence to get up in front of people and do teaching. So I think you sell yourself short about your public speaking skills.
Yeah,
You know?
it's a little edutainment going
There
on,
you go.
right? I got to
Right.
distract them from their phones. So
And
it's
a
a little
little
song
acting.
and dance
And a little
acting
little
up
acting.
there. That's right.
That's great. Well, that's all the time. I mean, this as it's really good when the show goes quickly because you know it's going well. But I wish we had more time to talk about this. But I'm supposed to be doing a show every week, so you never know when you'll be back. So I want to thank my special guests, Kirstyn Lazur and Tim Parise. Thanks to both of you for being here. It was a great conversation.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you.
Well, and special thanks as always to my sponsor, Damian and Danielle, Sedona Real Estate Group at Caldwell Banker Realty. You really want to seek them out for your real estate needs because their devotion to the community and their experience matter. And by the way, I hope you'll tune in next Saturday, May 11th, because Damian Bruno and Danielle Gian will be my in-studio guests when they'll, of course, be talking about real estate, but also about their sponsorship of the Village of Oak Creek Barbecue at Boca Park near the Oak Creek Golf Course. That will be happening that afternoon from 12 to 4. And guess what? Yours truly will be serving as the MC for the event, and my producer, Ryan, along with our station owner, Chuck Helstein, will be on hand serving as event DJs, playing all kinds of great music. So you can build your whole Saturday next week around my sponsors for the past 3 months. And of course, with the show ending at 10 and this event happening at 12, I'm going to need to bust my butt to get over there. So I hope everybody will show up at the Oak Creek Barbecue. Remember, you can hear this show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Thanks for listening, everyone. Talk.
In my heart, the only way I know